Please welcome to Australia's Economic Outlook 2023, Director of Fortescue Futures and former Deputy Governor of the RBA, Guy Debelle, Chief Executive Officer of Crown Resorts, Kieron Carruthers, and Lisa Zembrodt, Principal and Senior Director of Schneider Electric Sustainability Business, and their host, Business Editor of Sky News Australia, Ross Greenwood.
I'm the only one with notes.
Careful, you're okay.
Well, we're back again with you, and thank you so much for your company. We hope you're enjoying the lunch today. It's going to be terrific. Your main courses are about to be served, but in the meantime, a fantastic panel discussion for you. And I am joined on stage by Kieron Carruthers, the Chief Executive of Crown Resorts, Lisa Zembrodt, the Principal and Senior Director of Schneider Electric Sustainability Business, and also Guy Debelle from Fortescue Future Industries and a range of other things as well. Guy, you've heard a lot of talk here today about productivity. Of course, your remit in the past has been to look at Australia's economy and through the eyes of the change that we've heard, particularly the Prime Minister talking about the energy transition. Just tell me whether that is going to add or detract from Australia's inflation story and also its I guess the whole notion of where we go to with productivity.
I mean, I think there's a huge opportunity for us, as the Prime Minister talked about, as becoming a green energy superpower. So one key aspect to think about is, which we haven't in this country for a while, is actually we have a huge capacity for cheap green energy, which is an input into basically every business. So if you've got cheap energy, and particularly cheap green energy, then that gives us a huge advantage over most other places in the world to do a bunch of stuff that we haven't done for quite a long time, and the Prime Minister talked about this. So we can move up the value chain rather than just digging up iron ore and shipping it to China like Fortescue does, obviously, and Andrew Forrest is obviously very eyeing off the opportunity to move up that value chain. So if you can deploy cheap energy into anything, then that gives us a much bigger advantage than we've had for a long time. So it gives us the capacity to move up the value chain, move into areas of manufacturing that we haven't been into for a long time. I'm from Adelaide originally, so I don't think we're going back to building Holdens here anytime soon. So I don't think we'll be back in that space, but we can move into the opportunities for spaces we haven't been in for a long time because of the capacity to deploy that cheap green energy.
Just one thing, I want to know about the capacity of the country to be able to afford this energy transition and to move up that value chain that you talk about. Because whose responsibility is it to create the capital to move up that value chain?
So, and again, picking up on what the Prime Minister said, it's for both the public and the private sector. And so if you look at something, I'll give you a specific example which he mentioned. So the Hydrogen Head Start program that the government announced in the budget provides the capacity for the government to go in alongside the private sector. But the private sector is going to be providing the bulk of that capital, not coming from the public sector. But at the same time, you talk about who's going to afford it. I mean, to some extent we have to pay for it, otherwise we're going to be in trouble if we don't. If we aren't able to deploy that renewable energy, we're going to be in trouble. The rest of the world's going to be in trouble. So that's there's not an unlimited price you're going to pay for that, but it's a pretty high price you're going to have to be willing to pay for that. The other way I think to think about it is it's a huge investment program that we've got in front of us. And so you talked about what are the inflationary impact. Well, the inflationary impact is it's just a hell of a lot of investment to deploy that we need to deploy, in part because we haven't done a lot over the last decade. So we've got a fair bit of catching up to do there. But we've got a huge investment program ahead of us, which is, from a sort of macro point of view, has demand implications. So you've got to manage that. In and of itself is not inflation. In fact, when we get to the point, one advantage about renewable energy, it's renewable. It's not a finite resource. Well, not in our lifetime, certainly, but not in a lot of people's, a lot of our future generations' lifetimes either. So it's a renewable resource. So the marginal cost at some point is really low, and so in the deploying the investment into the renewables over the next while, that's going to create pressure because it's a large amount of investment. Once we've got it in place, then it's actually disinflationary, not inflationary.
So, Lisa, I want to come to you because you are quite unique in some ways. You work for perhaps one of the oldest electricity companies in the world. Schneider Electric was created really back in the early 1800s and went into electricity not long after Edison really invented it. And so the history of your business and the way in which it's transformed itself over a period of time is also quite some story. You heard the Prime Minister say earlier that you've got to have ambitions, you've got to have goals. When you sit back and look at Australia's energy transition, how confident are you that Australia can meet its targets?
Well, Australia has a really unique opportunity as a result of its fantastic natural resources. So we have the opportunity to build our local supply chains utilizing local-made steel and aluminium and making use of the natural resources and minerals that we have here. And with that, we actually have a really great and unique opportunity. Not only that, but we also have a lot of land, right? So we've got lots of land, really good wind, really good solar irradiation as well, which means we get a lot of electricity from every solar panel that we install relative to some other areas of the world. So we have a really quite unique opportunity in order to, that makes me quite confident, which is part of the reason I continue to stay here in Australia and put the talents that I've built over the last 20 years in the energy industry here to use in Australia, because I truly believe that we've got an opportunity to do something quite unique.
But yours is one of those companies that also creates the technology that effectively almost leapfrogs the ability for renewable energy to become more affordable. That's the key here, isn't it? It's all good to have the philosophy, but you've got to have the science to drive down the price per unit of the electricity that's being output. And then, secondly, you've got to be able to transmit it.
Yeah, so we've spent the last 20 years, once we recognised about 20 years ago that climate change was the biggest risk and issue that we faced, we've spent the last 20 years on technology to make energy more efficient and sustainable, because we recognize that not only is the vast majority of emissions coming from the energy system, so about 75 to 80% of all emissions globally come from the energy system, but we also recognize that about 30% of all energy is wasted. So we've been working on technologies that make the energy system and the consumption of energy far more efficient. So digitization so that we can be more efficient, and electrification so that we can decarbonize, because electricity is the path to decarbonization. So we've really spent the last 20 years working on those technologies and partnering with our customers to deploy those technologies that we've created in order to be more efficient and sustainable.
All right, you might wonder how I'm going to get Carruthers into this conversation, right? You might wonder that.
I was going to leave.
That's right. No, but I've actually got it right. So, Kieran, one of the big issues for Australia right now, which places enormous pressure on this transition of energy, is population. Population growth in Australia is rising fast. 1.5 million people the government is forecasting in the next 5 years. Housing is an issue, but the fact of the matter is that in this business here that you're in, this is actually a benefit for you, isn't it? Though there may be pressures in other areas from population, the more population, the more tourists, the more everything you've got coming through this country, though it might create pressures in other areas, is actually music to your ears.
Well, correct. And obviously with the fantastic assets that we have, there are a couple of things where we need that, both growth and population, and I think Australia is one of the fastest growing populations in the developed world. Fantastic for us in terms of a new customer base, but also the skilled labour that we need, the kind of team workers, team members that we need in the culinary side, housekeeping, hotels, on the gaming side, the entertainment, retail. There's a lot of work that we do to develop that locally within our Crown College, but the need to bring in more skilled labour, people like myself, not from around here, long time association with Australia, but 10 months living in the country. The need to grow that population, the need to bring those skills in, the need to bring tourists in, it's critical to the success of our business going forward. We're keen on playing a significant role in each of the major cities that we operate in. Obviously here in Sydney, a fantastic asset. As John mentioned earlier, absolutely one of the very best in the world. I've been in this business over 30 odd years, started as a trainee dealer back in the 80s. Yeah. I've been right through the world seeing some of the most magnificent resorts. There's nothing that has the quality of the hardware that we have here at Crown Sydney. Crown Melbourne, expansive property, just an enormous joint with fantastic facilities, very diverse, 52-hour different food and beverage offerings, fantastic hotel offerings, still in many people's minds, just a casino. And we're changing all of that. we are going to become this beacon of excellence, which is about an entertainment destination, a multifaceted, integrated resort that is so many things more than just a place to go and have a punt.
All right, I've got to basically take the Band-Aid off and ask you, obviously there's the regulatory issues that face you as the new owner of Crown. Trying to work your way through this business, because in other places you've been, Macau most recently, you're in running wind there. Just explain to me the differences of running this business under those constraints as compared with how you've run other operations in the past.
Well, I actually think Australia generally, and particularly Crown, we will now be leading the world in terms of how casinos, integrated resorts should be operated. And you could very easily argue that should always have been operated in the way that we are going to moving forward. When I talk about us being this beacon of excellence, that's just not around the quality of the physical hardware. It's about how we develop and interact and engage with our team members, the kind of experiences that we're going to provide to our guests and customers, but also how we conduct ourselves as a business, as an organisation. And that means working to the very highest standards of compliance, not to the bare minimum to get across any line that's set in front of us by governments, but to ensure that we completely transform the way that we operate, and particularly around areas, risk management, ensuring the kind of people that are on our gaming floor, in our property generally, should be there, that we should be engaging with. But responsible gaming and harm minimisation in particular, and the Prime Minister made a comment earlier, and I'll paraphrase, about you have to have ambition to be successful. And harm minimisation in itself would suggest that there's a certain cut-off that you're comfortable with, to say we're okay if this percentage of people are harmed by any of the products that we offer. And that's clearly not what we want to do. It's not something I want to do personally. And stealing a line from the auto industry, and particularly with Volvo, where they had a campaign where nobody should be injured in one of our vehicles. And it's the same thing with Crown and the way we are going to move forward in this regulatory environment and support it and push it and really drive this paradigm shift in our industry that says nobody should be impacted or harmed. Now that's harm eradication is a very, very ambitious target and very easy to argue that you will not get there. But if you push for that, we will genuinely minimise the number of people that do get impacted by our business. And we have guardrails in place now. There are many hundreds of millions of dollars being invested. We've doubled the number of people we have in responsible gaming. What was really exciting for me more recently, we had a company-wide survey. Obviously, one of the questions is about the knowledge not only of our responsible gaming programs, but how important our team members thought that was to our business and our place within our communities. Now, you would expect, because of all the work that gets done in this, that the casino segment in particular would be heavily engaged with that, have a full understanding. But what was fantastic to see was well over 80% of our team members, the vast majority of whom do not work in the gaming departments, saw this as being a pivotal part of our engagement with the communities, of our privilege license. So that tells me that our team members are hearing the messages from us in terms of how we need to operate. So you're going back to the earlier question, and give an Irishman a microphone, you're going to get a long waffly answer. Going back to the original question, we can and we will succeed in this market under this regulatory framework. We will have to change the way the industry operates. We have to change, certainly and rightfully so, the way this company has operated in the past. And by focusing on the fact that we are an integrated resort, we are not a casino. It's a part of the entertainment offering, but it's not the offering that we have. And that's true with all of our properties. It opens us up to a wide range of people who, and I speak to, in Melbourne now, I ask people, when was the last time you were at Crown? I'm not really a punter, I don't go there. There's 52 restaurants and bars. You could go to a different one every week and never go near the casino and still enjoy the services and experiences we offer. So we will be successful, and we are leading the charge in terms of how this industry will be run in Australia and globally.
There you go. Thank you so much for that. I want to go back to the population growth story here. And Guy, the question, I guess, is whether Australia has right now something of a housing crisis. It's got a housing shortage. You've got rents rising very quickly. You've got the pressure on the energy infrastructure rollout. Can Australia right now sustain another 1.5 million people over the next 5 years?
I'm not sure I can get into the detail of how sustainable that is, Ross, but one thing I want to pick up on, though, which we can't sustain, though, is around the energy transmission. And that is one of the, again, the Prime Minister mentioned with the rewiring the nation, you picked it up just then as one of the key focuses of Schneider. What we can't do is have all those people without a grid which can support them. And we don't have a grid today, or we have a grid which is really creaking. And we're deploying all this new capacity into that grid, in prospect, and we've got to get that energy from where it is or where it's generated to where the demand is, for where people are going to use it, for where companies are going to use it. We don't have that. Transmission, I think, is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, challenge in the energy transition.
And does that potentially risk us meeting all of those emissions reductions by 2030 and out to 2050?
Yeah, so to pick up on your point, so electrification is probably 80% of the decarbonisation path for the economy. For households, my fellow MIT alum Saul Griffiths, electrify everything. So for households, it's about 100% of the story. For the Australian economy generally, it's probably 80% of the story. But to electrify everything, you need to get the electricity into everything, and so you need the wires and you need the transmission. So the generation needs to be deployed, but where the generation is going to be is not where it's been historically, and so you need the wires to get it there.
But then to come back to the point, doesn't extra population put even more pressure on that whole system, on the grid, and then the need for that networking, the transmission, to be put out fairly urgently?
We have that, I mean, to some extent, leaving aside that population growth, we have that urgency now.
Yes.
We've had it for the better part of the past decade. So that's nothing new. It will add more to that. But to pick up on the point you made, we also need some people to install that capacity, to install both the generation and to install the transmission. So we've got to have those people. They're not all necessarily in Australia today. And so, those skills we need, and we either need to generate them locally or redeploy them locally, and I think there's plenty of opportunity for that, but we probably also need a few people with those skills which don't exist.
Which goes to the migration review that the government has already announced as well. Lisa, I'll come and pick this up with you because you've gone to the whole science. Your business is really all about the science of the energy transition. Is there anything which obviates this need to be able to move electricity from point A to point B? The reason I'm asking that is because, again, if science is one of the answers, right now you've got a lot of people, farmers, potentially, people who wouldn't have wanted gas pipelines through their properties, now saying, I don't want those, transmission lines, that high voltage transmission lines through my property. Is there any answer to this, or is this something that should have been worked out well and truly a long time ago, and now there's a bit of catch-up having to be done?
Community consultations have to be done to bring people along on the journey. But to your question, absolutely. There's a lot of discussion about the supply side of the equation. How can we get enough of that grid scale renewables through the transmission system, through the distribution lines to the consumer? And there's two things that we need to be thinking about in order to make the full decarbonisation of the grid actually possible. The first is that we need to make sure that we're actually thinking about the demand side of the equation, right? So how can we use electricity or energy more efficiently? And also, how can we use it at the right times of day when electricity is cheap and plentiful? So if we have, middle of the day, if we look ahead 10, 15 years and we have a massive tax on the system in EVs, tax in terms of more demand. So if we have more demand in the system from EVs, for example, we don't want everyone coming home and charging at 6 o'clock, right? Because that will put a burden on the system that would require an overbuild of the system and therefore a higher investment than what's actually needed than if you manage the times of day where energy is consumed. So those are two really important things. And the other one is actually taking the opportunity that we have in the short term to install more distributed energy resources, put more solar PV on rooftops and buildings. And those are things that we can do now that can alleviate the amount of investment that's required, but also speed up the transition.
Yeah, it's interesting, Kieran, because even here, and looking around even your staff and so forth, they're now required to live in capital cities where housing and rents is becoming an issue for them, where many people who might be public servants or others are now considering leaving the big cities because they're becoming increasingly unaffordable. Housing, cost of living, the whole thing. Is this, especially again, coupled with skills shortages, which goes back to the population story, is that an increasing stress for you in running a business such as this?
There's a couple of issues there. So, go back to the immigration and the population growth. When we reach out to people to try to bring them into Australia, bring them into Crown, first thing they look at is the fairly complex immigration process. It's getting better and it's fantastic to see that the government's looking to review that. The other thing they look at, and these are people who are very much in demand, so they look at that issue, then they look at when I get there, the cost of living is much higher than wherever it is they may be coming from, and looks like increasing over a period of time. Plus, if I get myself over those two hurdles, where am I going to live when I get there? So it becomes a compounding issue. We have this triple threat of visa issues in terms of the length of time taken to get it done, the cost of living and housing. So that becomes a genuine impact on us in terms of bringing in the skill sets. Then in terms of what's happening within our CBDs and the lack of vibrancy that we're seeing, particularly through the weekend, and the work from home impact. So not only are people moving further out from the cities, anybody that does work in the city isn't working in the city as often as they used to, and that's having an impact. So again, if we look more specifically to Melbourne, nightlife, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, places booming, it's fantastic. During the day, not so much. You know, and in a business like ours and like many others, it's not just about being successful at the peaks. You've got to make sure that you're managing through those shoulder periods as well and driving and optimising, whether it's through hotel occupancy, food and beverage covers, etc. So the work from home dynamic, people moving further out from the cities, that's also creating a challenge for us.
So final one for each of you as I go through. Guy, are you optimistic for Australia over the next couple of years and then beyond out to the next decade?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're talking about rising interest rates, and Andrew referenced the 90s recession, all right? I mean, I came from Adelaide and my whole generation left town, right? So just a couple of things bearing in mind. One, interest rates have gone up a lot, but they did come at, I'm not defending my old job, but, you know, they were low. You know, if you told someone in 1989, 1990 where interest rates are today, they'd think that were extraordinarily low. So, but they are causing some issues for households.
Well, mortgages are so much bigger now. And so
no, that's right. But I suppose the other thing which I think often gets lost is, you know, unemployment is 3.5% or just over 3.5%. That's pretty good. In the history of this country, for the last couple of generations, that's about as good as it gets. Female participation is as high as it gets. So there is a lot of optimism to think about. And then to pick up on Lisa's point, you know, we have this huge potential in front of us on the green energy space, which we haven't had in front of us for a long time. We've been the quarry for the world for the last 20, 30 years. The green energy is that and a lot more in potential. We have to realise that potential. We can't just wake up one day and think, here we are, green energy superpower. But we have that capacity because we have great sun, great wind, and a hell of a lot of land to deploy it on. So that gives you, I don't know, that gives me a hell of a lot of grounds for optimism.
That's good. I can't let you go without asking. The Prime Minister was here today. Did he tap you on the shoulder while you were here?
Oh, he said hello.
Yeah. Nothing else? No job offer? Nothing else?
Again, I think, as he said, you know, as much as the Australian and Sky would love a scoop, it's probably not where it's going to come from.
That's good, very good. Lisa, are you an optimist for Australia and the way in which his energy transition is rolling out?
I am, and the transition is an economic imperative, right? We know that we have to transition, not just because 20 years from now in 2043, all of today's existing coal assets will have been retired, right? So the transition is coming regardless, but it's also something that's quite an economic imperative. It's estimated that the costs of climate change just in natural disasters alone will be 1.2 trillion by the time we get to 2040. So this is a massive cost on our economy. So we really need to take advantage of the opportunity that we do have to transition our energy system. I mean, look at New York City right now, right? It's red with smoke from bushfires in Canada. And it was just a couple years ago that Melbourne was the same where I live. And it's not just bushfires and smoke. Right now we've got droughts and floods and severe storms, and these are not only exacerbated by climate change but made more frequent. So I know that we've got the opportunities to transition and do it well and to learn from that, because it won't be the only big transformation that's coming for the next few decades. Right after that, we probably have a transformation that's going to be required around water security and then food security. So we have a lot to learn, and I'm really excited for what we can do here in Australia.
Kieran, you in this game, you've got to be an optimist, for God's sake, surely.
If I was a betting man.
Well,
if I was a betting man. So, I mean, you can't not be optimistic. I left to come to Australia in 1989. It's been a long walk to get here. I moved my family here 20 years ago. I've been commuting from Asia every 6 weeks pre-COVID to get here. There's such an energy and a buzz about the demographic here, the persona of what it is to be Australian, the diversity of the culture here. And then when you look in my world, people still want to be entertained. People want to escape. People want to be have wonderful experiences. They want to enjoy life, and we're seeing that post-COVID, people coming back more and more. Being a bit more careful with the money. Discretionary spend is definitely being impacted. People are booking a suite rather than booking a villa. The booking period is a little shorter because you don't know, is there going to be another interest rate? If I book it a month out, is something going to happen between now and then? So there's some definitely changes in behaviour, but the basis of I want to have a good time, I want to be entertained, I want to go somewhere that's just classy, I want to go somewhere that's safe, I want to enjoy life. What's not to be optimistic about?
I've got to say, Kieran Carruthers, Lisa Zembrodt, Guy DeBell, many thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Russ.
For having me.
Well done, guys.
Thank you.